we've already gone through that. My name is Jessica. I came here from Brooklyn. I'm super excited to be here. I really like Denmark. So much so that the last 3 or 4 months, I've worked my way up to 49% Danish fluency in Duolingo. These are some of my favorite words right now. Just thought you might be interested. I'm definitely not going to do any of this talk in Danish, though. I just hope to be able to read and identify 49% of the words I see in the wild. Okay, so I want to start by sort of explaining this title and what I mean by scaling down to people up. To me, scaling down software development is to make it better for more humans, a broader group of humans. And really, then that makes me think about this other phrase that has been with me a while. It's about things being human scale. This is something that has come with me in all the work I've done because, as Phil mentioned, I have a background in design, but actually urban design, architecture and urban design. I used to work for the city of Boston in this building here, which is not human scale, but it's Boston City Hall. And so I worked to make cities for people. And since I'm here, I thought I'd mention, does anyone know who this is? Yeah, he's Danish. It's Jan Gehl. He's my favorite urban designer, and he's someone who embodies, building things at human scale, and his life work has been about building things for people and really taking all people into consideration when you're building. He did things like this here in Copenhagen for people. So building things for people, building cities for people, building software for people, to me, there is a lot of overlap. Because when I think of a city, I think of a place that belongs to everyone. And I think we don't really think of software and development that way, perhaps, but I think it is. I think different than other professions, the work that we do in software is something that anybody else should have access to. It shouldn't be something that is closed off to an elite, some seemingly elite group of people to do this. So what is then human scale software development? Well, I'll talk about what I think it's not. And I think right now we have a lot of stuff that's built for developers and not for people. But, what's the problem with that, right? Isn't it really great to say, built by developers for developers? We understand the needs, right? Who better to build software and tooling for developers than developers? I think that just means we're not building for people if we're building it for developers. Are developers people? Chew on that. Developers are, of course, people, but they're a subset of people. Because like I said, development our field is this place that other people should have access to than just the people who do it professionally. And so developers is a subset of people that does not include the people who will be developers in the future, and it doesn't include people who want to tinker with development, who don't want to do it full time, but have an idea. They have something they want to build, a need they need to fix, something they need to automate. You don't have to be a developer to need to automate something in your life. So I think that is the disconnect between a lot of the stuff that we're building and how we build it and how we document it, is who we're building it for. Are we building it for a broader group of people, or are we strictly assuming everyone is a developer and only developers are doing this? And so part of the problem I see is it's such an easy starting place, the dev environment. I think we could all agree that it's complex, right? When you start a new project, there's always something to install, get on your system. Maybe your local environment for the website you're working on doesn't work anymore, and you have to spend a day debugging it. There's always something new to learn and install, and certainly there's nothing wrong with there being a new tool or framework. That's great. I'm just saying it adds to the complexity of getting started and even giving experience developers the energy to build something, to build an idea, because there's all these hurdles into getting started. There's rivalries between factions and frameworks, and that is not fun. And then there's this idea that things need to be perfect before you're putting them out there. They need to be the latest and greatest and polished, and I don't believe any of that. It also requires time and debugging. Like I said, no matter how long you've been in development, when you start a new job, when you start a new project, you're always spending time sitting there getting everything up and running. And a lot of times it requires another person, which is a really difficult resource for a lot of people. I remember when I first learned Git, someone just sat down next to me, told me what to type, and then whenever I'd say, well, why did I just type this? They would be like, don't worry about it. And that's such a terrible experience. And then we get to all the hurdles about, like, you actually want to publish something. You want to put something online. You have to think about hosting. And so there are a ton of hurdles in the development environment for people who are just starting out, people who just have an idea, and for people who are already developers. But I know that building something that should include everyone and think of everyone sounds really hard. And it is. It requires more work. It's going to be easier to build for less people and care about less people. But it is so worth it. I fundamentally believe this, that the more kinds of people we have contributing to software, the better it will be. And not just for them, but for everyone. The web will be a better place when we have more people putting out their ideas, and then ideas spinning off of those ideas and spinning off of those ideas. The more we can get out there, the more people we can have contributing, the better. And so I'm going to talk about some things that I've worked on, and then talk about some things that are out there that I love. And during the course of talking about these things, we'll sort of learn about things to care or not care about. The first project is a project I did called Get It. So this goes back to thinking about my own experience learning Git. And when I was at GitHub, I was talking to more people about how to use Git and GitHub. And I felt like I really didn't want people to have that same experience where you had to have somebody sit next to you and explain Git to you and also tell you what parts to ignore. And it's ridiculous. So Get It is an app that teaches people the Git and GitHub workflow. So you start by creating a local repository. You learn how to push it up to GitHub. You learn how to clone a repo from GitHub, fork and clone a repo. Then you actually add a collaborator, which is a robot called Repo Robot. And Repo Robot will contribute to your project, so then you have to learn to pull in changes from Repo Robot. You have to make a pull request to the original. And so you learn the whole flow of working with Git and GitHub and working with the collaborator. And almost 16,000 people have done it now, which blows my mind. It's also the project with the fourth most unique contributors on GitHub. So I have NPM and React Native below me. I'm also the only individual on this list. No. No, I honestly, wait, no, here's the segue. That's not to brag, but I want to say that, this is written with pure HTML files, JSON, vanilla JavaScript, like ES5, probably 90%, not below ES5, regular CSS, Electron, and Node. And I really believe that things don't have to be shiny and complex and loaded to be impactful, to be out there helping people. And I also am not ashamed at all that there's no fat arrows in this. The package JSON for Get It has 8 dependencies total. 4 are dev dependencies and 4 are regular dependencies. Everything's built with NPM scripts. It used to be in Terminal. When I first built it in 2013, it was a part of the Node School Workshoppers. Node School is a series of global events that have command line apps that teach you Node fundamentals. And it started that way as a part of that course, but as I was doing that and workshopping with people, there were more people trying to do it just to learn Git and not learn Node. And the first step was install Node. It's this invisible thing that's going to live on your computer. Don't worry about it. And I realized I was giving people that experience. There were so many people who wanted to understand Git and GitHub who weren't developers, but who work with developers and who have to interact with Git and GitHub. And they wanted to understand it, but they were having to go through this flow of understanding what installing Node on their computer was. So that's why I moved it to Electron, and that also enabled me to have all the visuals inside of it too, so that people could have diagrams explaining these things, but also they just download it like a regular app that they're used to. And now you don't have to read a bunch of stuff in Terminal, which is good. Okay, so speaking of Electron, Electron, well, some people have heard of it. That's cool. Electron is a library out of GitHub that is for building desktop apps with JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. And I used to be at GitHub, and I was on the Atom team. And in the beginning, at that time, there was this library called Atom Shell, and it was hidden amongst all of the other dependencies and repositories in the Atom org on GitHub. And so some people knew about it and were starting to build stuff on it, but it was a select few, and it was only people who were already in this space, people who were already using Node WebKit, people who were already trying to build desktop apps with web technology. But I felt like it was such an amazing tool for people to build things who wouldn't consider themselves app developers, because if you can build a website, then you can build a desktop app with Electron. And so I felt like we really needed to actually do something with it. And I was told we didn't. Like, I was told it wasn't important and no one was going to work on it. And I fought and pushed, and finally I got the okay to spend my full time working on it. And so then I started, writing up what I was going to do and how I was going to contribute to Electron things. And I was told, you should make a scaffolding. There should be an Electron init, right? And I was like, no, scaffolding is for developers, and I'm building this for people. But I also think that Electron apps can be anything. They can be massive apps like Slack. They can also be menu bar applications that do one small thing. There's no way that there's going to be a scaffolding that is going to give you what you need for Electron. And then you'd end up in this situation if you were a beginner, where if you ran Electron init, you'd end up with all these files. You'd have to ask somebody, and they'd be like, oh, don't worry about those. You don't need those. And that's not the experience I wanted to create. So instead, I worked on the Electron API Demos app, which is an Electron app that demos the Electron API. And I wanted to do as much as I could to make this a tool that people could tear apart and read and understand and really learn about Electron. Because also, people really didn't understand the concept of what does it mean to have Node and Chrome combined? What would I do? Why would I use Electron? And so this app actually lets you interact with the things that Electron does so that you can understand what you might build and do with an Electron app. But so I got really nerdy down to the file structure. And this isn't how you would create your files if this were your Electron app in production. But I wanted this to be something people could open up and dig into and understand and see all of the correlations between the files and how they related to each other. And I also did diagramming for how the app actually starts up. What's the relevance of the file structure, and how does that relate to how this app actually starts up and runs? What gets called first, and then what does that call? And then I explain what each of the directories and their files contain. And then talk about the actual UI and naming conventions throughout the app so that people can also add demos. So a few more things about this app that I felt were important is that the code snippets in the app are real code because Electron uses Node throughout, so I could actually read the JavaScript files, and then just append that text to the DOM, which means anytime the code in the app changes, the demos are automatically updated, which makes maintaining it so much better, which means it will be a more useful tool because it will be easier to maintain. It also has limited ES6 in it, and maybe it seems like I don't care about ES6. I really don't. But I wanted it to be the most familiar JavaScript to the most people. There was just no reason to make it look foreign and to make people have to understand what is new in ES6 to be able to understand how this app works. But, the caveat is that one of the great things about Electron is that you get the latest Chrome, which means you get most of ES6 out of the box anyways. So we wanted to highlight that you can use ES6 out of the box, but we didn't want to make everything look foreign. So we picked 3 things out of ES6 and then documented that in the documentation, and the front page of the app explains those 3 things too. And then there's no frameworks. I don't want you to have to know Angular or React or your favorite framework to have to align with our chosen framework for you to understand the app. So it uses HTML imports and is pretty simple. OK, and so another thing is this site I made called Essential Electron, because I had been spending time talking to people, really trying to get people to understand how cool Electron was, and getting people who, my target audience were people who would never think it was possible to build a desktop app. And so I kept wanting to find ways, rack my brain, how can I make this clear? How can I explain what this is to people? And so this was sort of an experiment that worked out, this website, where I just really wanted to drill down, how can I explain this technical topic in the simplest way? And I gave myself some rules. So each section could just be 2 to 3 sentences. I would replace all jargon with just expanded phrasing, just say what it is. If there were new concepts that couldn't be defined really, then I would define them. There would be links for more information in each section, and then I would have a graphic when needed. So here's one section where you can see I have the phrase one browser, because to me that's important. Why is it relevant that you're working with one browser? If I'm trying to learn about Electron, then I want to understand why that's important. Why is that relevant? And why is it relevant that you're using the latest Chrome? And then if I get that and I want to learn more, then I can. And then there's diagrams to help people understand that Electron has 2 processes and how that works. And defining calls to native elements. Maybe I went overboard, I don't know, but when you are coming from the web and you don't have a background in developing for operating systems, that phrasing, just the phrasing of native elements, what does that mean? So that's something I wanted to define too. And last week, I got an email from someone, and it said, I'm not a coder/developer, and I was able to make a small web page for myself on arts management because she forked that page, and she had stuff that she wanted to share in a simple way with people, and she was able to figure it out. And honestly, this is what I live for. This is the only reason I do anything. If someone is self-proclaiming that they're not a coder and developer, but says that they did this thing, they were able to share information, they were able to get an idea out there without having to be a professional developer. And that's what I really mean by our profession is so much bigger than the people who do it professionally. And people should be able to tinker and share ideas, and it should just be so much more approachable. Okay, another project is Sheetsy.js, which is a library for visualizing Google spreadsheets. It's a really, really small library. It has these sections. There's 2 methods in Sheetsy maps, 2 methods in tables, and then 8 helper functions. So it's really like this. Like you can either load a map or get the GeoJSON from your spreadsheet. You can create a table and then create a search bar in your table. And then there's the helper stuff, mostly about math. But it doesn't have to look like a spreadsheet that just got spit out into another thing and looks just like a spreadsheet, right? Because then you're free to use CSS and whatever to make it look not like a spreadsheet and display the information in any way that you want to. This was like a really sad attempt in January when I was like, I'm going to catalog everything Trump's doing. And I lasted 2 weeks. But what's also crazy to me is that this library is also not fancy. It was one of the first things I started writing in 2012 when I switched from urban design into development. And I've since rewritten it, but it's still, I'm telling you, it's not fancy. But people are still finding it useful, and there's still just not better things. And that bugs me. And so sometimes people ask me, can you edit the spreadsheet from the site? And I'm like, no, because spreadsheets already do that. The whole point for me was to create something really simple that the most people could use and understand, and just let the spreadsheet do the work. Spreadsheets are amazing, and they already have an interface. And so I didn't see any reason to complicate the library and add more stuff to it so that people could do that. Okay, so the next thing is talking about some of these great things that are out there that I like spreadsheets. I think that they're this unsung hero because a spreadsheet is a database that requires no setup, that almost everyone already knows how to use. I mean, if you just think about that just as a tool, something that's out there in the world that requires no setup and that most people know how to use, that means that you can create things and work with people who aren't developers, because people who aren't developers have data too, and they have things that they want to build, and you may want to help them. And when Sheetsy is working with a spreadsheet, once you have the spreadsheet hooked up to the site, that's it. You only have to ever interact with the spreadsheet, and there's no deploying, and so every visit to your site gets the latest data. And so you have this way of building a site and then having people interact with it who can come from all kinds of backgrounds. And if you still don't want them to interact with a spreadsheet, you can use a Google form, and that adds another layer of making it approachable so that you can have a project and have someone still contributing to it. But my favorite thing right now is this site called Glitch. It launched earlier this year, and it's from a company called Fog Creek in New York, and it's really amazing. It is an in-browser editor. So this is a screenshot from Glitch, and you can see you get an editor, and you have your files on the side. But there's shared editing. People can edit it with you at the same time. So you can invite someone to your project, and you can both be in this editor typing. You get a free node server out of the box. You get free hosting. Everything's auto-deployed. And then similar to forking a project on GitHub, they have this concept of remixing. And so everything that is on Glitch can be remixed and done. You can just start from wherever that person was and then start making it yourself. And they have a lot of tutorials and tools and sample APIs being used so that you can get started from that point. And then Neil Dash, who works at Fog Creek, has this quote about it, which sums up for me a lot about what I think is so important in changing the way we view like what a development environment is and who has access and who a development environment is for and who it's not for. And this makes a development environment for so many more people when you think about just starting from a working project and then modifying. He also has this quote that doing this, like lowering these barriers to entry and making things more approachable, means that you're going to get a more diverse community with their broadest set of ideas. And I just want to focus on that a minute, because that is the most exciting part of all of this to me, is that we can make things so that more people can make things, and we're only going to get better stuff. I don't know, I'm going to get real sappy about it, but I just think fundamentally that's one of the best things we can do. So this is actually, I have a glitch now for getting your spreadsheet as JSON. So this is an answer to that tweet that was up earlier when someone just wanted their spreadsheet as JSON. So thanks to Glitch for providing free hosting and free node servers. So now you can just put in your spreadsheet and get it back as JSON. And then finally, I wanted to talk about different ways to document. And this comes right out of Yuna's talk, which you just saw. So just think about all of that. And then I wanted to shout out some other people that I love doing this, like Mariko, who works at Google and is doing really fantastic technical breakdowns on things. So is Lynn Clark. She has codecartoons.com. She's at Mozilla. And then Amy Weibo, who does bubble sort zines. They're really doing awesome work, and they're just putting content out there all the time about technical topics and explaining them. So I really think that when you scale down, you're not creating something of less value. Your project is not less cool if it doesn't have fat arrows. Your project is not less cool. It's not less worthy to be on GitHub if it's not perfect. When you scale down, and you scale down for people, you're creating more potential. And I believe that the web can be and deserves to be hackable, unpolished, less complicated, and that in doing that, we can have a web that is approachable, empowering, and fun. And there are a couple of other talks that I would recommend. Jen Schiffer has a talk called Your Grandparents Probably Didn't Have Node. And she goes through one project, 8-bit art, that she has, and she talks about all the decisions she made along that process to make it a better project for people and not developers. And then Rachel White gave a talk at JSConf EU earlier this year called Keep the Internet Weird, and it was about the golden age of viewing source and web rings, and when we were, well, I won't speak for all of us, I don't know how old you are, but when we were sharing and hacking on the web in a different way than we are today. So that is all. Thank you very much.